Hello, everyone, and a good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you are in the world. And thank you for joining us today. My name is Nikki Hamblin. I am an Olympian and a member of the education team at the International Testing Agency. It is my pleasure to welcome you to the April 2022 ITA Monthly Education webinar, in which we will talk about doping and mental health. Before I introduce our topic further and our panelists, please allow me to do some housekeeping. First of all, a reminder that we are delivering this webinar in 5 languages. On your Zoom menu, you should see a button called Interpretation. By clicking on this icon, you can select a channel with your preferred language. I will be presenting this session in English, but you can also listen in Arabic, French, Russian, or Spanish. Some other housekeeping points. As I can see, many of you already are. Please use the chat function to tell us your name, where you are from, and your sport or role. The Q&A is also open, so please ask us anything on the topic of mental health. We will be leaving some time at the end of the session to answer your questions. Please note that it goes without saying that while we encourage debate, interactions, and questions, we do not tolerate any kind of aggressive behavior or abusive or racist language. We trust you will all join us in the spirit of fairness, respect, and integrity. As I said, many of you are already using the chat, so let me just pause for a moment to say hi to you from Malaysia, the USA, Sierra Leone, and Germany. It's really great to have you all with us today. Today's webinar is part of our educational monthly series that are publicly available and designed to tackle key anti-doping topics and to raise clean sport awareness. A big thank you to those of you who are regulars, and a big welcome to anyone participating for the first time. We are very happy to have you all with us today. It is my pleasure to introduce our official presenting partner for the second year, Inform Sport. Their investment allows us to deliver the webinar program free of charge in 5 different languages. Inform Sport is a global certification program for supplements that batch tests products for substances prohibited in sport. As supplement contamination continues to be one of the leading causes of inadvertent doping, we encourage athletes and athlete support personnel to check all products before use at sport.wetestYoutrust.com. The ITA is proud to be recognized by UNESCO as a leading international organization for the delivery of anti-doping programs. And this webinar is delivered with the support of the UNESCO International Convention Against Doping in Sport. Before I introduce today's topic, I would like to acknowledge Soren Johannesson, to whom this session is dedicated. Soren was a Danish decathlete and the first person from his country to receive a lifetime ban after failing multiple doping tests. Multiple mental health issues, including those related to doping, affected the rest of Soren's life. Unfortunately, Soren has taken his life too soon at the age of 48. We want to thank Soren for courageously sharing his story and for supporting clean sport during the later part of his life. Now, let me introduce to you our topic, doping and mental health. Did you know that 1 in 3 athletes experiences mental health issues at some point during their life? This rate is somewhat higher than the general population and may reflect sport-related stresses which contribute to mental health challenges, including, for example, an injury or performance pressure. Over the past year or so, we have seen high-profile athletes speak out and prioritize their mental health and well-being over performance. But it is still a relatively stigmatized topic and does not get talked about much in the context of anti-doping. Therefore, in our webinar today, we will address the following questions. Firstly, what is mental health in relation to doping? Then, we will talk about some of the mental health symptoms and disorders seen in athletes. We will then look at how mental health can be a cause of doping and how we can improve athletes' mental health to prevent doping. Finally, at the end, we will leave some time for questions from you. Along with our experienced and passionate panelists, we want to begin the conversation about why and how supporting an athlete's well-being and mental health should be integral to the sports system. Because, along with other benefits, this can prevent doping and facilitate clean sport. It is my pleasure to introduce to you Thais Savada. And Thais and Genevieve, if you'd like to put your cameras on and maybe give us a wave while I introduce you. Thais is the Office Advisor and a member of the education team at ABCD, the Brazilian NADO. Thais has studied extensively in the area of mental health with a Master's of Science in Psychiatry and Mental Health and a PhD in Sports Sciences, specializing in the neuroscience of sport. Thais is a former elite athlete, having competed for the Brazilian artistic gymnastics team and has coached and managed age group teams. She was also a DCO at both the Rio 2016 and Tokyo 2020 Olympic and Paralympic Games. And I know some of her IDCO community are here in this webinar because they want to see Thais present. So hi Thais and welcome to our webinar.
Hello everyone, it's a pleasure to be here with you today. And I'm very happy, and also our ABCD team, our Brazilian NADO, it's very glad for this invitation and the opportunity to share even more anti-doping education.
Thank you, Thais. Our second panelist today is Genevieve Jensen. Genevieve was a professional cyclist for 10 years. She represented Canada at the 2000 Sydney Olympic Games, has won several World Cups, as well as 2 Junior World Championships. In 2005, Genevieve failed a drug test for EPO and was banned from all sport for 10 years. In 2015, Genevieve opened up about the situation that led to doping, which she will share more about shortly. Genevieve is now the head trainer at Orange Theory Fitness in Montreal and lives a full life with her partner Paul and dog Ranger. She is a mentor for young women in professional cycling, is increasingly active in advancing safe sport policies for athletes, and returned to competition on the Pro Gravel circuit in 2022. Welcome, Genevieve.
Thank you, Nikki. Bonjour. Hello, everybody. It's a pleasure for me to be here. I will talk a little more very soon. So see you later.
Thank you. Before we do dive into our topic, it is important to recognize that this is particularly challenging and definitely some elements of Jen's personal story. We know that this community will show her the respect she deserves for speaking out to help others. But, and I believe Jen will attest to this, to help others, we need to ensure we, ourselves, are mentally fit. So, if you are affected by anything we cover today and would like to talk to someone, we have added some links to let you know where to go in the resources section of this presentation, which you will receive via email after the webinar. Let's now go to our first item on the agenda, for which I will hand over to Thais to present on What is mental health in relation to doping?
Okay, Nikki. In the modern area of competitive sport, winning is often everything. And elite athletes every day needs to cope with a huge number of physical, mental, and chemical stressors, sometimes related or associated with their sports discipline, such as social event deprivation, lack of identity, pain, and injury. It's interesting that athletes often receive comprehensive treatment and rehabilitation for physical injuries, but this might be less often in the case of mental illness because of their sometimes viewing mental illness as sign of weakness. Nowadays, having multiple world and Olympian champions talking about their own mental health problems and difficulties, this might be less vanish the speech of who has a mental suffering will achieve no success in sport and life. Still, the lack of knowledge of sports community, avoiding athletes to have access to proper mental prevention and treatment, and its relation with doping needs further discussion. Elite athletes might also use prohibited substances for relief stress, negative emotions, pain, and withdrawal. Mary? We should actually wonder about the paradigm as physical exercise is known to protect individuals' mental health. While here today, we are exposing the elite athletes possibly facing mental illnesses. Elite sport environment for itself might put athletes in adverse situations, not always will succeed by them. As every moment is challenging, it's common athletes have to deal and face mental health symptoms. Clinical studies suggest that athletes are not immune to mental illness, despite their superior condition, physical one. Numerous studies attest that existence of mental illness in elite population, it's at least as great as number as in the general population. For instance, the rates of depression and anxiety might be similar when comparing to the general population, but rates of eating disorders or even substance use disorders might be greater in elite athletes compared to general populations. For the understanding of poor mental health as cause of doping, we explain a bit further on brain functioning. We can see that mental health symptoms increase hot cognition related with limbic system. It means emotions. Instead of cold cognition that related with frontal brain areas activation, more related with rational processing. It means that in adverse situations, people with poor mental health, they can have a struggling on decision-making process. For athletes, this might be a bad decision-making related to choices on shortcuts, on short-term performance effects, instead of long life, career, and well-being. In this sense, doping can be viewed as a rational behavior, even though not necessarily consciously desired by athletes. On the other hand, poor mental health can also be a consequence of doping. By empirical knowledge and regular news, we see that sanctioned athletes face mental disorders. Moreover, performance-enhanced drug users can have affected their own central nervous system, changing their good neurophysiology functioning. These athletes might experience negative psychological consequences as mood changing with suicidal ideation, aggression, impulsivity, psychosis, depression, anxiety, and having inappropriate and undesirable behavior in social and sporting contexts. By this complex system, it's still difficult to know whether doping induces psychiatric symptoms or if it is a consequence of psychiatric symptoms and personality disorders can cause doping. The majority of studies cannot discuss this causal effect due to their own research design limitations. Nikki?
Thank you, Thais, for sharing a brief overview of your knowledge and experience in this area. For me personally, I finished up competing 5 years ago, and like many athletes, I experienced ups and downs during my career. I can certainly relate to the fact that I didn't ever even want to admit to myself, never mind someone else, about any mental health related challenges because I didn't want to be or show any weakness. I will now give the floor to Janvier to share her personal story of how her situation and the impact of this on her mental health led to doping.
Good morning, everybody. Like I said a little earlier, I feel extremely fortunate to be able to tell my story to all of you because you all have a part in safeguarding against doping, and you're extremely important in the development of the future generation of athletes. And I would also like to thank the International Testing Federation for giving me this opportunity. And last thing, please understand that I'm going to speak today about my own experience. Everything I say here is a personal opinion, but I hope it can give you an insight on what else is there around doping or the consequences or the source of doping. So for the purpose of this discussion, we can say that my story began at 14 years old because it's the age I was when my coach, who was 40 years old himself, hit me in the head for the first time during a training session. I was told that it was to make me a tougher athlete because the world of competition is like living in the jungle, and in the jungle, only the strongest survive. So I came to believe that physical violence was normal and that was actually good for me. At 15 years old, verbal and physical violence progressed to sexual assault and rape, which was immediately followed by threats like, I love you, I'm in love with you, and if you leave me, I will kill you, and then I will commit suicide. I was never the same person after that first sexual assault. I built a thick shell so no one could ever find out what happened. And because of I was living violence every day, I was extremely afraid that he would actually kill me or he would actually commit suicide. It was real. I didn't want to live for the rest of my life with the responsibility of the death of someone on my shoulders. Before doping, I was winning a lot of races in the juniors, including national championships. And then my coach decided that he should take more and more time off from work to focus exclusively on my athletic career and my development as an athlete. So he eventually took a leave without pay from his job. And during that year, when I was 16 years old, we discovered I was anemic. I was told that I couldn't wait for the anemia to subside and get healthy naturally because I was the one supposed to win, to get sponsors and earn money for him to live. I was the breadwinner of the family. So at 16, he brought me to a doctor and they decided to give me EPO in order to keep training and performing regardless of my anemia. So it was just supposed to be like a few injections to start. That's, everything. It's always what they say. But once I started EPO, I never stopped. So to put it in regular life context, in our society, in less than 2 years, from 14 to 16, I became a victim of abuse, a cheater, And because doping is illegal in sport, if you take that situation and you put it in our society, illegal stuff, you become a criminal. So victim of abuse, cheater, criminal in the world I live in. At 16 years old, I was a teenager without an escape route, no one to talk to, and no one to help me. Unfortunately, abuse became more frequent. So there was rarely a training session without verbal, psychological, and physical violence. The coach took control of everything, from who I was able to talk to, when I was able to go out, to everything regarding the finances. And at that time, I desperately searched for an excuse or a way to get out of the sport, to leave him, but I couldn't find one. I could not just stop because I was earning money for him to live. And he made sure to remind me of that he had left everything in his life, including divorcing his wife, to take care of my career. So it was all my fault. I couldn't go to another coach because of his suicide threats, or his threats that he would kill me first. And also because without EPO, my performances would suffer, and with less performances, it would raise suspicions of doping. And I couldn't go to the federation, my national federation, or the UCI, the Union Cycliste Internationale, with my story, because I would be accused of cheating. So I was down to thinking that the only solution was to get into an accident. Not something that would kill me, but something that would be serious enough that I could finally quit cycling. And then in that case, I guess my higher power took care of my wish, because instead of an accident, I failed a drug test. And I swear to you, it was the best thing that ever happened to me. Failing that drug test I was relieved, and it meant that I could finally stop cycling and leave my coach, because my life at the time was so difficult that a positive drug test was just a small inconvenience in comparison. I was willing to have my name tarnished forever instead of continuing to live with him. So you might ask yourself, well, why didn't you just leave? Well, I would like to let you know that it's never as simple as just leaving an abusing relationship. Fleeing an abusing relationship is by far the most dangerous step, as the perpetrator will fight to take his control back. And most fatalities, they happen in the act of leaving or after the victim left the relationship. So from 2005 to 2015, I would rather have my name associated, or my identity associated, with performance enhancing drugs than being associated with the abuse I lived through. And when you think about it, that's really, really sad. I'm 40 years old now, and when I think of that, I find it's crazy. And in 2015, when a good chunk of my healing process had taken place, I finally felt ready to open up about the violence and how I was coerced into taking performance enhancing drugs. But I was not ready to speak about the sexual assaults and all that stuff. To me, it was still too dirty. So it's only last year in 2021 that I started to open up about the full story, the one I just told you today. So with all that said, it's my wish that with what you've heard today, that you work in your own circle of people, own sport, to increase awareness to all the authority figures that doping is something not just doping. It can mask deeper problems that we cannot ignore when we give sanctions to athletes. Anti-doping efforts and safeguarding against doping must also include education about abusive relationships and coercion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Geneviève, for your bravery in sharing your story to help others and to make a difference. And I know I'm not the only one who is grateful for you being able to share your experience. As I can see from the chat, we have comments like amazing story, thank you for sharing, thank you for opening up, you're so brave, so vivid, and so amazing. And from Janice, thank you so much for sharing your story. This is the third time I have heard Genevieve's story firsthand, and I still cannot even comprehend or come close to imagining what she went through. Many of our audience may not be able to either, but there will be some that may be able to relate to some elements from their own situation. Wherever you sit on the scale of understanding or experience of mental health, it is vital we open up this topic to provide greater understanding and to enable conversations about why mental health is important for athletes, how we can identify any issues, and how we can address them. One of the first steps is recognizing symptoms and disorders, either in ourselves as athletes or for athlete support people. We will now go back to Thais to share why elite sport can present a risk factor for mental health, to explain some of the symptoms and disorders seen in athletes, and alongside this, acknowledging that an elite sport situation is different to that of a member of the general population, because there are very few specialists in this area, and there are additional responsibilities such as anti-doping. Over to you, Thais.
Well, Nikki, as we can see, although it's an invisible problem, here we find real research statistics about mental health symptoms in elite athletes. Mental health symptoms, it means the manifestation, and disorders are the diagnostic disease by a doctor. They are common among elite athletes. It impairs performance. It increases the risk of physical injury and delays subsequently recover. It means that we must remain on focus since symptoms can be either problematic. Mary? Be aware of factors that increase the risk of mental health symptoms and disorders in elite athletes. Highlighting the physical events, we conclude that mental health couldn't be separated from physical health on its own importance. Mary? Many are the mental health symptoms and disorders in elite athletes. And although we have some specific psychometric instruments to measure athlete symptoms, and also we have some directions what work better with athletes in terms of treatment and medication, there are no consensus guideline for diagnosing athletes and management of them. But we still need to know that strategies can improve athletes' mental health. And these strategies, this management might be with both individually optimizing the traits of these own athletes and also the environment of training and competition for all of athletes. Then we should take note. Be aware of possible mental health symptoms and changing behaviors. We need to know better our teammates' thoughts, intentions, and values. Elite athletes' routine is challenging, and it can easily confound experts about its regular process because, yes, athletes struggle and live under severe stressful situations. They need to learn how to handle with their feelings, emotions, and thoughts, but athletes don't need to be scared of or worried of. Then even general psychiatrists face difficulty in diagnosing athletes. It means that we do need to consult a sport psychiatrist to do it so. And remember, the ignorance of ingredients and improper labeling of medication and supplements, it's not excusable under WADA code. Double check the prohibit list, and if it's necessarily because of your own medical condition, request a therapeutic use exemption. Nikki?
Thank you. I just want to read out the last comment from Michael in the chat because it provides a really nice segue to what we're going to talk about next. So Michael has said to Genevieve, really courageous to tell your story. Sadly, I suspect that this is just the tip of the iceberg, and there are many other victims out there suffering in silence. And as we've heard from Thais, from the research, from what we know, and from people like Genevieve who are brave and are able to speak out about what happened to them, the prevalence of mental health issues within sport seems to be relatively high. And this can be whether we see any symptoms or see any physical signs or not. And so, what is really important is to address this silence and normalize the topic and check in with one another. So, let's now launch a quick poll to find out whether you talk to your coach, athlete, or others in your sport community about mental health. The options that we've provided for you today are yes, I do, no, I don't, or I'm not sure whether we talk about it or not. So all responses are anonymous, so we don't know what you choose. So we do encourage all of you to get involved. And perhaps while we're waiting for a few more of you to respond to the poll, I'll just give a few more shout outs because I only got to a few countries at the beginning. So I'd like to also say thank you to our participants from the Philippines, from Switzerland, from Nigeria, from Brazil, from Turkmenistan, from Japan, Egypt, Venezuela, Thailand, Belarus. It is really great to have you all here from all around the world. Now, as we've reached nearly 50% of our audience, now 50% of our audience who have responded to the poll, we can close it and we can see from the responses that they're actually quite positive, that 63% of you do have talked about this issue within your community, but there's still around 19% of you who haven't and 18% of you who aren't sure. From my personal experience, and from the small amount I know, this doesn't really surprise me, as it is hard to know what to say or sometimes how to start normalizing the conversation. And that certain things do have to be in place for an athlete or their support people to be willing to share in something that can be so personal. So we'll now go back to Genevieve for her to tell us what enabled her to speak about her experience.
Thank you, Nikki. Well, for me, I needed to heal. I needed to understand what had happened to me. And that took more than 10 years in therapy. And I don't want to say that I was lucky to go and have the reflex to seek professional help. But I was so damaged that I knew that I couldn't continue to live my life with all those scars. So I started a big process that brought me a lot of peace, a lot of understanding. And today I have a wonderful life and I'm happy in my life, and I'm successful at my work and all these other things. And most of all, I'm fit emotionally and psychologically to have relationship with others. So what enabled me to tell my story is healing first, and that's a process that's gonna be different for everybody, and it's gonna take also a timeline that's different for everyone. And when I met my husband, he was the first one that I could really speak 100% authentic, the real Jen. And that also gave me a lot of confidence to be able to go into the world and share my story. And I would like to say to everyone here, it's possible also that you can be that person. You can be that ear or that compassionate person. It's possible that, someone in your life comes and talk to you, and listening is so important. You don't have to have any solutions. Sometimes just listening is so important, because that's what Paul did for me. And then I became increasingly aware of other athletes' stories. And like Michael said, it's only the tip of the iceberg, because right now we hear about either doping stories or abuse stories, but I can't be the only one that lived both at the same time. So it's still very taboo, but it doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. So when I started hearing more and more athletes coming out with their struggles, I felt the responsibility, especially because now I'm really healthy and happy, that I needed to share this story to show a little bit of hope that yes, you can live really awful things, but you can also live a happy life after. So it's many little things that allowed me to share.
Thank you, Jen. I think just one point I would really like to pick up on here is that we can all play a role in this, because it is clear from Jen's story that it was the people around her that ultimately supported her being able to speak up. So let's now more definitively link mental health as a cause of doping. And for this, we are going to launch our second poll. So, have you ever felt under pressure to achieve a better performance and felt like everything you are doing now is not enough? And we are asking this to our entire audience, as we know that coaches and other athlete support personnel, for a variety of reasons, in addition to the athlete, face pressure to perform. And also, to be clear, this doesn't mean you doped or facilitated doping, just that you found yourself asking this question, what else can I do? The options that we have available are yes, no, or I'm not sure. And thank you to everyone who is responding and getting involved in the polls today. So maybe a few more of you could get involved so we can get to 50%, because that would be really great. Okay, we've hit 47, 48. Okay, I think we'll close it there. So as we can see, 72% of you have felt some kind of performance pressure, which is normal in elite sport. And this is okay, as long as we know how to manage it. We will now go back to Thais, who will explain how pressure and not being able to manage it well is one of the causes of doping.
Well, we have seen just not 10 statements, but as how can elite athletes' life can be tough. And the most known causes of doping, because of poor mental health, are the pressure to obtain competitive advantage, together with the lack of internal skills and personal support to handle with the sport's vulnerability. The stigma of weakness of those who have a mental suffering, or the unavailable resource to help as soon as possible athletes to seeking care for their own mental health, even when their first goal is just to achieve performance. Also, non-accidental violence, such as harassment and abuse, that occurs in all sports at all levels, with a greater risk with psychological, physical, and sexual abuse at the elite level. For this point, I should say that many negative outcomes and tragedies just happen because of this systematical sport system that diminish the facts said by many as regular-based environment, or even it's not recognizable by others. And for the last, as just as any non-athletes, athletes are exposed to drugs without the intention of improved performance. Mary? The use of doping appears linked to several psychopathological disorders and specific personality traits. Studies suggest that athletes with these personality traits have higher tendency to resort to performance-enhanced drugs. And it's an external factor related to parental or even coaching toward perfectionism. It means that actually perfectionism can be both toward or protecting against doping. When perfectionism is external, related to parenting or coaching, it's toward doping. But when it's internal, together with internal resources related to intrinsic motivation, efforts, persistence, it can protect athletes against doping attitudes. The next one, please, Mary. Here in the topic, we can see that some sports are more related to specific mental disorders. For instance, concussion and contact sports. Athletes in general are not protected against the development of many common mental disorders. This is important to us to have in mind. And on the bottom, we emphasize the awareness of psychological and social cultural risk factors that increase the rates of athletes to use performance-enhanced drugs. All of this suggests that more vulnerable athletes are together with lower internal resource related to the sport ethicals and values can be higher the odds of them to have doping attitudes. Nikki?
Thank you, Thais, for highlighting the causes and risk factors. Related to what Thais has just shared, I would like to highlight that perhaps one way to overcome some elements of these causes is to ensure we see and look after the person who is the athlete. Something that the intense and focused world of sport can be easy to overlook. Genevieve, from your experience, how important is it for athletes to know and understand that they are more than just a sport performance or their success? And as a follow-up to this, in your mentoring role for young professional women cyclists, how do you speak to them about this?
It's extremely important. And I believe it's something that every coach and federation should prioritize when they develop and communicate with athletes. Athletes need to understand without a doubt that they are human being first. And a part of this human being is good at sports. Because as athletes, we are judged almost exclusively by our performances. Now in society, it's starting to change. There are some athletes that have sponsors because of the value they bring to their brand without the performances. So that's already a good change. But mostly it is still about performances only. So if, like me, you started practicing your sport at a very young age, for me, it was 11 years old. But if you look at other sports, it can start from 5, 6 years old. That's the only thing you know. So am I a good human being because I perform? That question becomes ingrained in us. It's the only thing that we know. So unfortunately, this can lead to a lot of self-doubt, anxiety, low self-esteem, and depression. So when the performances drop, this accelerates, that loop we have in our head that, oh my God, now I don't perform. I'm not good for anything. I'm not good in anybody, for anybody. So that I believe that even when we put 100% of our energy geared into the sport, we should start preparing retirement. And I don't say that in a negative way, as soon as we can, because at some point, athletic career is going to end. And we don't know when that's going to happen. Sometimes it can be an injury. Sometimes it can be an illness. Sometimes it can be, another factor in life, not necessarily because you fail a doping test like I did, but there's always other factors that are out of your control. And an athlete who cultivated the other sides of their personality will transition into that next phase of their life much easier than the athlete that for which, you know, their sport became their whole identity at 100%.
Thank you, Jen. It is really great and we're really grateful to you for sharing this. And it's so valuable for you to give your perspective to everyone in the audience today. So given everything we have covered, now let's talk about how we can improve the mental health of athletes to prevent doping. For this, we'll go to our final poll of today's session, as we want to ask you whether you know where to go to access assistance to support mental health and well-being, either for yourself or for your athletes. The options that we've provided for your response are yes, no, or I'm not sure. And you guys are getting used to how the polls work now because many more of you are participating in the shorter amount of time. Just to maybe read out a few more comments, very wise words from Genevieve. Bruno says, congratulations to everyone for sharing this moment together, which is so important. Thank you to the speakers. Thank you for a great seminar, and many comments about the bravery and courage that Genevieve is displaying. Okay, let's now close the poll. And so the good news is 50% of you do know where to go to access resources, but there's still 20% of you that don't and 24% of you that aren't sure. And that's okay, because our next section will let you know where to find tools and offer suggestions for the future. And Thais, we will go to you first.
How can we improve and support mental health of athletes to prevent doping? Actually, the key factor to address the problem of doping and mental disorders by athletes is prevention. Improve strategies that more efficiently overcome the stigma of mental illness by you, physician, trainer, coach, parenting, discussing more about it and take the statement of the winner Olympic and the World Championships. They are talking today about their own difficulties, and also Jen here today. But also search for evidence-based and please train how to create a safe strategies as nutrition, weight training, psychological approach, and an environment for help seeking and also recognizing symptoms to mental disorders, drug abuse, and doping. Also having mental health professionals trained to deal with the athlete's needs, also related to performance and to general well-being, since general well-being also is related and directly affect their own performance. Then if you're just concerned about the athlete's performance, you need to know that mental health is a big part of this. Just take care about their own mental health to have the great performance as possible. And talk about where athletes want to go with their career and goals in life. Help athletes to clarify conflicts among their values, motives, interests, and behaviors. Encourage self-efficacy. It's not worth whatever it takes to win. And we all need to be empowered with relevant information of how to create an environment that supports mental wellness and mental health help seeking, includes athletes' home, training spaces, Olympic village, where athletes can access hygiene of mind. But so far, we have talked as elite sport environment can harm mental health and improve doping odds usage. Please, Mary? However, by my own research data, we can see that support mentally health athletes can have a brain and also psychological protection against mental illness, even when they are already retired, the athletes. This means by creating an environment that supports mental well-being and resilience, we can improve athletes' long-term life benefits and also short-term performances. Next one, please. Organizations can support athletes' mental health by protection against doping, providing education and evidence-based, as they need to learn skills to promote resilience, psychological flexibility, self-compassion, and adaptations. Here we find two very helpful tools that are online, free of charge, that might help us to start our own education. Here we have ADEL, that's Anti-Doping and Learning Education by WADA, and also we have the Mentally Fit website from International Olympic Committee. So please just go there, make the course, read the athlete's statement and the professional advice, share with your colleagues, and remember that education is prevention. Our own advices are, athletes, you don't need to be afraid to ask help. And if you are athlete support personnel or sport manager, be aware of symptoms and changing behaviors. Make your team expert on doping prevention. And for the last, please, Mary. On behalf of ABCD, our Brazilian NADO, I appreciate your attention and interest on the topic. And we emphasize the UNESCO words about that we must highlight the harmful effects of doping, and we need to protect our athletes' mental health. Thank you all. Thank you, Nikki.
Thank you, Thais, and thank you, ABCD. Now, Jen, I will go to you before we go to our Q&A section. So I know that things have changed in terms of support for athletes since the early 2000s. But what would you recommend is implemented by the sports system to improve and support the mental health and well-being of athletes?
I believe that we should have stronger safeguarding and education against doping, and also against related to doping with abuse in sport. Because in my case, I mean, doping was intertwined with abuse from the start. And I'm certain that it's still happening in 2022. It's just that we don't know about it. And that what I'm going to say next, it might be shocking, but I also believe that it's partly because we don't have a support system to take care of the athletes that would come forward with such troubling information, especially if it's an athlete who wins and is good for the sport, good for the popularity of the sport. So I believe that we need to create an environment where an athlete would feel safe to speak, athlete would know that he will be cared for, they will be protected, and also given a chance to reintegrate into the sport if performance enhancing drugs were involved in their sanction and into an abusive relationship. So this would include a more holistic investigation to find out how the doping began, who were the different players, etc. And until we provide a viable escape route that can address the professional destitution that the athlete faces when he or she comes forward, silence will prevail by necessity, because we need to survive. So I also believe that the athletes who use performance enhancing drugs should be involved in the fight against doping and in the education material at a higher level in the committees and the federations, because we lived it. We are super in tune to the little signs, to the red flags, to what to look for, especially in regards to mental health and pressure. Once you lived it, like for me, I'm aware of it in my life in general all the time. So that could be a really good addition to the structure that's already developed to continue the safeguarding and mental health amélioration, if I could say.
Thank you, Jen, for your recommendations. I think there's some definite things for us all to go away and think about and think how we can integrate these types of ideas into the system to make it better. That wraps up our discussion today. We have linked some clickable resources to this presentation for your future reading or viewing. And included in this is a link to the movie, excuse the pronunciation, but La Petite Reine, which is described by Genevieve as the PG version of her story. As mentioned in our introduction, we have also linked some options for places to go if anything we have talked about today has affected you and you would like to talk to someone. So now we will go to some questions from our audience. So Jen, I think the first question is to you. So perhaps you could turn your camera back on and yep. And so Maria says, fascinating story. Why did you not speak to your parents?
Because it's really difficult. Speaking to your parents about such troubling things, I didn't want my parents to be scared. I didn't want my parents to take me away from the sport because my sport was my dream, was my passion. And I wanted to continue practicing my sport. So when you're a teenager, the parents have the right to say you're not going to practice it anymore. And also in my case, when I was 16 years old, I moved away from my house. I moved to the US to continue training and racing. So by the age of 16, 17, my parents, they didn't know what was happening and they had very limited contact with me because everything was managed by the coach. So it was difficult. I couldn't talk to anybody because I felt so ashamed.
And I think, I mean, I don't know a lot about this topic and I would never claim to be an expert, but this is one of the key things that an abuser does, right? Is they isolate you and they isolate you away from your parents. Okay, and so we'll go to our next question from August. Oh, sorry, my apologies. I missed giving a shout out to Benin at the beginning of our webinar. So welcome to everyone from Benin. And sorry, probably got that pronunciation wrong as well. Our next question from Cecile to Genevieve. What made you decide to consult a therapist or psychologist? Sometimes people don't want to do it because there is too much pain and don't want to face the pain. What was the trigger for you?
It was exactly my situation. I was in a lot of pain. I didn't want to talk to anybody, but I always had, since a young age, maybe the will to survive and the will to live at my fullest. So I was living in Phoenix at the time when I finally left my coach, and I was so angry. I couldn't have normal relationships, normal friends. And I started thinking, I need to get rid of that tape in my head because the coach was still talking to me. What I was saying to myself was not my voice. It was someone else's voice. And then I figured, well, if I ever have children, I'm going to raise these children with all the baggage I have on my shoulders. And this is so unfair. I cannot have, this brand new person in the world and try to raise that person to be the best person he or she can be if I have all that stuff. So I was more than 10 years in therapy. So it was a long process, but the first few years, I couldn't talk about anything. If you picture an onion with all the different layers, it was just a mini layer at the time. And it's really after 4 years when I came back to Canada from the US that I met a therapist, and it was really a good match. So with him, I was like done. I said to him, we need to get down to the bottom, and it's with his help and with the tools that I could, finally free myself up. But it's definitely a process that we have to be patient with, because the rewards are not instant. It's not like doing a math problem and already have the answer, or doing a race and having a result straight away. It's really something that you don't see getting better for a very long time, and then all of a sudden you're better.
Thank you. I think we have time just for one more question, but might have to make the answer brief. So Thais, maybe we'll address this one to you. In elite sports, there will always be pressure and demand in trainings and competition. The question is, how can athletes and coaches handle it in a healthy way?
I think this is one of the most difficulties that we have to face as looking forward for both sides, as improving performance and also the well-being of the athletes. Then the most important thing is to know better who is your athlete and where you can push further, I think, and where are the limits for this. That's why it's so important, just not every day we trying to think and to manage the situations, but also have some external professional advice that can see something that day by day maybe we cannot see. So it's very regular and common. We have these symptoms in the athlete's life, and unfortunately in Jen life is the outcome was doping, but many athletes not with this same outcome, but they face this own negative feelings and they live with this scare of not handle with the situation. So it's important just to getting a closer view day by day, but also have some external view with some professional and the extra advice for putting all together in this mixed, looking for the best performance for the athlete, but also for the best for their own personal and general identities and well-being. Because being a better person, having clear mind, will also provide a better performance. So I think using all of the skills and tools as much as necessarily for the best of both career and also the well-being of the athletes, short and long term.
Thank you. So unfortunately, we have run out of time today. I still see there are still some questions. So if you would like those answered, or if you think of other questions, you can always reach us at education@ita.sport. This wraps up our webinar today. A big thank you to our panelists, Thais and Genevieve. And of course, a big thank you to our audience for your attention and participation. We do hope you found this session valuable. As a reminder, after the webinar ends, you will receive a link to our survey along with the presentation slides. We ask that you do take a few moments to fill the survey out. And finally, if you would like to receive updates from the ITA, including information about future webinars, please sign up using the link you will find on the slide. Thank you all once again, and I wish you all a great rest of your day.